A short video here to show how to use RMarkdown. Try to do it as quickly as possible. Let's go to, this is our studio right here. First thing you're going to do is new file and go down to RMarkdown. Give it a name. I'll call this temp. And what it's going to do is produce this automatically. Now at this point, we don't want to touch this. This is YAML, which is basically a header telling how to format it. It's going to put output HTML, which if I want PDF, I'm just going to leave it as HTML output, and then I'll convert the HTML to a PDF. And yeah, this puts header information. I'm going to also leave this as is. Everything below it is the stuff we're going to modify. So you can get rid of all that. So the easiest thing is you can just add text. You just write text here, you put more text, you put even more text. Hey, if you want a paragraph break, you just have to do 2 spaces, 2 or 3 spaces. More text. Let's do even more text. Got it. And then we can knit that. So if you just want to write stuff, let's give it a name and a location. Put it on the desktop. That looks good. It's going to output. This is what it looks like. Here's the header that's formed automatically with some text. If you want to make into a PDF, you can open it in browser, and then in your browser you can export it as a PDF if you want. So let's do something a little fancier. The next thing that's basic is to put some code, either inline R code or, and this is running R code. Let's see. You can put inline code like this. Now this, you use the prime, which is way up on the upper left of your keyboard, and you put an R. If you forget the R, things are going to get confusing. So you always put an R, and then you can put some operating R code right now. So you can say something like standard deviation of 1, 2, 3. This allows you to have calculations done right in the text. The other thing is to make some chunks in which you just say R and put some code, R code. Yeah. And then I'll close it with triple prime. You'll notice it just colors in this chunk. I didn't give the chunk a name. If you forget the R, we'll see in a little while, nothing's going to run. so you need the R. Let's go see what happens when I run this. Notice, I'll add text 1. That 1 there was from the standard deviation of 1, 2, 3. Man, that's boring. I'll make it 1.1 or 1.1, 2, and 3. That's a little better. I'll knit it. So I'll add text. There's the standard deviation. So you can do a calculation that automatically works in the text or a chunk. And notice the chunk, it shows code, and then it runs and shows the output, and it shows code and runs the output. By the way, if you want it to not quite look like that, but you want it to be stacked so it does all the code and then all the output, you can do this trick. You can put these all on one line, separated by a semicolon. That's an R trick, to put multiple lines on one line. Let's take a look at that. It does both these, and now it puts these 2 things out. You can name chunks, by the way. I don't know quite what that gains you, but maybe for debugging. If you do that, every chunk has to be given a different name. That'll run fine, but yeah, it doesn't show up any differently. What is more useful is you can put arguments. Now here's a couple biggies. You can put cache. Cache is default as false, but if you say true, what that does is when it computes an answer, if you're running your document over and over and over as you're doing things, if you don't change your code here, it'll just save the output and print the output again, which is nice if you're working on a long document and parts of it are finished and other parts aren't finished yet. You can have the parts that are finished just store their answers so they aren't recalculating every time. Another really handy one is eval. If the default is true, if you say false, it blocks it from running. It shows you the code but won't let it run, which can be handy at times. It just shows the code. There's another one called echo, which is kind of the opposite. If echo, the default is true, if echo is false, it won't show the code, but it'll show the output. Okay. So there's notice the code disappeared. The other set of handy commands are ones for figures. So let me do a figure. I'll put a plot here. There we go. The figure ones are really nice. There's a figure alignment where you can either center it or put it on the left or the right. By the way, there's a lot more of these if you want to put multiple plots on one line and things like that, but I'll just do a couple of them. There's a figure width in inches, height in inches. And that can be used to, what did I do wrong? Oh, left doesn't have a, there we go. There, it's left aligned, and it's a 4x4 inch plot, including the margins. Okay. So that's all there is to it. You just write R code and it runs. You can write R code inline and it runs. This means you can have a document and change the data anytime you want, and it essentially recalculates everything. And you can have as many of these chunks as you want. So what else can you do? Well, the next thing you can do is do some markdown, which means you can modify your text. Here's a few markdown things. If you want something italic, you put a single thing around it. If you do a double, it's bold. If you want to strike through, you can do that. Okay. If you want a superscript, like up squared in your text, you can do that. If you want a subscript with a 2, you can do that. What other ones? If you have a symbol that means something else, so this usually is reserved for tech. If you want to print a $sign, you can put a backslash in front of it. Okay. Another thing is lists. You can make lists by putting a little star and a space. If you don't put the space, it won't work right. I almost did it. If you hit a tab, it's going to do kind of a sub point. Okay, so let's print all these out and see what they, or knit them all. See what happens. See, there's italic, bold, strike through, superscript, subscript, a literal, and here's how a list looks. Block quotes look like this. Okay, notice the little gray thing, that's good for quotes. Verbatim text. If you put the triple and you forget the R, if you don't put the R and just do this, what happens? Nothing. It just formats it nicely in R format, but it won't run it. It's much like having eval equal false. So if you just want to show code and not have it run, you can do it with the tick marks. I do that all the time by accident, by forgetting to put the R. You can make tables a couple ways. Let me show you the simplest one, is with the cable command. So it uses a knitter command. So if you have a data frame, you can do, by the way, you can always put comments in your code, like any R code. Knitter cable, and then you put the data and maybe a caption. And it'll automatically format it. This is a nice way to show some data here. Boom. There it is right there. X and Y centered. There's a more sophisticated way of creating tables, but oh yeah, I'll show it right now. So you can do this too. Up var2, up var3. Now what if I have data that I want, on the first one I want to left justify my numbers, in the middle one I want to center them, and on the right one I want to make them left justified also. Let's do this. So what I do here is, so the default is just to do this and then put numbers. Okay, let's look at what that looks like. They have to be all lined up nicely, but then you get this output. var1, they're all left justified. If you want to center them, this is what you do. You put a colon on each side. If you put it just on the right, it'll right justify it, align it. If you put it on the left, it'll left align it. If you put it on both sides, it'll center it. So and then let's make this one left justified only. There we go. See, now it's centered, centered, and left. Move to the left. So that's it for tables. I think that's all I need to do. One thing, if you don't know tech, ignore this totally. But you can always insert tech inside your code too. Is text, I mean with inside your text. With tech. And tech, if it's simple, it'll just format it nicely. It's putting $signs on both sides. It also has lots of like integral from 0 to 1 of x squared dx. Notice it shows it right there. And those all knit very nicely. So for putting mathematical equations in your data, that's really nice. And if you want them on a line by themselves, you just do this sort of thing. I'm going to make a fraction. There. So any last things? Yeah, I think I'll do one last thing. Just to mention it, but I won't do much with this. It turns out there's a whole bunch of, not just R, but even though this is RMarkdown, and it mainly works with R really well, you can put code for other languages in. And you do that by putting a symbol instead of R. And it'll either format it or it'll even run it if you download the right packages. So let's look at some of those alternative chunks real fast. I think in R I can print them all out. Let's see. Names, knitter, knit engines. You don't need to know what I did right there. I'm just getting a list of all the things that it can format other than R. So here's languages: awk, bash, there's Haskell, there's Python, Julia, there's Stan, which is a Bayesian simulation program, SAS, Stata. At the very least, these will format things properly for the languages. And often if you, JavaScript and CSS, which by the way, this is advanced, can be put directly into your HTML pages, not without even doing chunks. But let me just show one real fast. So here's bash, which is a Linux kind of a shell. Runs the internals of your computer. So I can do ls and it's going to show in my present directory. So that's going to bring me current directory, and I'm going to see what's inside it. So in other words, this is using a non-R language. And SQL is another one. that it can format for. Okay, so CDLS, and here's the yep. So those are Linux commands basically. You can think of them as Unix commands. And that's all there is to it. You just write text, you write chunks of R, and you just keep knitting. And it allows you to make a single document with working working R code, tech equations, and text. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. I will stop now.